Hey, everybody, and welcome to the live recording of the Young Screenwriters podcast. Today, we're talking about, is your script ready? Is it ready to send out to contest agents, producers? So, we're going to get started with the live podcast recording in about 3 minutes. We use these first 3 minutes just to kind of settle in, see how you all are doing, and give folks a chance to kind of trickle in. And then in about 3 minutes, you'll hear some beautiful theme music composed by
Jazzy
Adam,
tunes.
a jazzy tune, and we will get into it. But how is everybody doing this fine Friday?
I feel like it's going to be a good writing weekend.
A good writing
I don't
weekend.
know. I've got a good feeling. I'm in a better headspace. I'm going to finish a project and I'm going to have mental space to like open up and say, okay, what's the next priority project, or what is it that I'm actually going to focus on next once I've done, because I don't know about you, but I have these intrusive projects that come in and say, oh, hey, you cannot work on anything else but me for the next until you finish me.
Yep.
And they just take precedence. Yeah, they are very they're emotionally manipulative.
Yeah, stupid little projects, but sometimes they're fun. I mean, unless you're talking about other work, like, day job work creeping in, where it's like,
no,
okay, all right, good. I was gonna say, tell it to get out.
No, that never takes over writing space time.
Good.
The reserved evenings and weekends that I get to. I did mornings for a bit. I did mornings for like 2 weeks and decided that was not for me.
Mornings, yeah.
Morning writing, anyway.
I write at night because I do that thing where you like are psychologically reclaiming lost time, I think. And like, also for some reason, just psychologically, it's easier for me to write when people can't reasonably expect a reply out of me for anything. So like, it's like 11, it's like 12. I'm in my zone. I'm like, heck yes.
That's late night.
Oh yeah. I have been having legit insomnia for the past month or two. So I've been writing at hours you do not want to know. But we're going to fix it. It's going to work out. It's going to be good.
It's going to be fun.
It'll be good. It'll be great. We'll see. We'll see if I make it. But yeah, super excited to talk about this conversation. And a lot of it is kind of in the to talk about preparing for contests that are opening up. So we're talking about polishing your screenplay for contest agents, producers, just polishing overall. But in particular, this time of year is prime time for contests. So
I've submitted to some. Did a couple.
Submitted?
I did a couple. Yeah. Kind of just for fun, just to be like, hey, I did the thing.
Put it out in the world. It feels good to put it out in the world. It feels like you're kind of just connecting with the world and being like, hey, I'm a writer, here I am. Sometimes it's just kind of nice to tell tell the world that you're part of this little writing thing.
And you never know what'll happen.
Never.
You might connect with someone. You never know. We're all, I think, way more critical of our own work than we need to be. And sometimes it's nice. Sometimes you get a little if you get a semifinal or a quarterfinal, it's a nice little pat on the back. It's like, hey, you're doing all right.
Yeah, it's my happiness and self-worth is derived from the approval of others. So for me, it is so nice.
It is. You and Taylor Swift,
Yeah, I really, really love that sweet, sweet approval. So I seek it where I can, and it's super healthy for me. Yeah. Well, cool. I think that we are ready to go live on that lovely note. So glad that's not in the official recording, although I guess it's on YouTube forever. All right, let's do it. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Young Screenwriters podcast, where friends talk about the everyday joys and struggles of being a professional writer, professional screenwriter in this wild, wild world that we are just living in. So today we are talking about polishing your script for contests, for agents, for managers, for producers, just for submission, and answering the question that every writer asks themselves: is this good enough? Is this ready to go? So that's kind of the topic for today. And we want to get into a few different approaches into this. We want to talk about the actual mechanics of getting your script ready, but it would be silly not to touch on the psychology of letting your script go and accepting that it's time for your script to leave the nest, so to speak. So I guess to kind of start, Theo, why don't maybe mechanics is an easy place to start. Let's talk about just kind of like, okay, you just let me know that you submitted to some contests lately. What are some things that you do as kind of like your final pass to make sure like your script is ready to go out the door, to hit send? What are some final things that you check for, just script wise, story wise, everything?
Yeah. So I have quite a list, I think, and some of it is feedback related. You want to make sure that you have a few different types of readers giving you feedback so that you know how they're experiencing it. And I think a lot of that, it's not so much about what the feedback they're giving to you is, but just making sure that they are having the intended experience. Because there's nothing like when you write something like, oh, hey, I wrote this romance, and someone is like, oh, so this is an abusive relationship. And you're like, oh no, that was not the intended experience. So I think it's good to get feedback to make sure that, you're just on the right track. You have enough emotional context, enough physical context, so all of that stuff makes sense. And then one of my favorite things to do is I will read, regardless of what kind of writing it is, the entire screenplay, let's say, out loud, with my physical voice. And I don't record it anymore, but I have recorded it to listen to it. But I've gotten pretty good at like listening to myself, and I will do it with the voices. And I will do it with like the intended dramatic effect of the narrative description. And the reason that I do that is because I want to catch how easy it is to read. And if it's easy to narrate, like an audiobook or like a movie, if I can read that and narrate it and it is smooth and I don't get caught up anywhere, then I know that I've tightened it properly. But if I'm stumbling over my words trying to read that thing, then there's some tightening that needs to be done. So that's like number one is the out loud read. And then there is a subtext pass, right? Where I'm making sure that is there an opportunity for this scene or this dialogue to have more subtext and not be as on the nose. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you just need to be clear and that there's not a problem with that. But sometimes it's like, oh, like what if I layered it this way? So it's like looking for those opportunities. And then it's like really mechanical of, okay, we're making sure we have no passive voice where possible. We are making sure this is in as few words as possible. We are making sure that there are no doubles in words, right? Like very often, and this is so often, you will use the same word twice in the same paragraph and not notice it.
Do you mean like the, or do you mean
no,
like
I mean
he quickly walked and quickly grabbed?
Yes,
like
that is
okay.
What it is, and everybody does it, and you don't notice it until you go back through. So that's another one that like I'll do a pass for of like, okay, I'm looking for doubles, or repetition is probably the better way to do it. So I have like a little mental checklist of things that I go through, but I think the most important one is that overall readability.
That's awesome. So to recap your process, some basic checks that you do as you're preparing to send your script out. Step one is you're really focusing on the experience for readers. And the way that you check that is you send it to people, you share it with people who you trust to kind of read the story, not necessarily for notes, but just to make sure that the vibe was right.
Correct.
And then part of it too, so it's the vibe check, basically does this pass the vibe check. Then it's the reading it out loud to yourself for flow is another part of that, right? And then I'm trying to think, you had the third one, which was wow, why did I just blank? But I know you're checking for repetition and
Repetition, passive voice, right? Which
passive
is
voice.
had been, was verbing, those kinds
Yeah.
of things. And also just like general tightness and like, could this be
Subtext.
said in fewer
Yeah.
words? And the subtext pass. The
Yeah.
subtext pass is important.
So vibe check, read it out loud for flow check. You have the subtext pass. Thank you, Jim. You're a saint. Subtext pass. You have the repetition and just the overall tightening and making sure it's clean and pretty to read. So that's awesome. That's a really good place to start, I think. And I do something similar. It's always helpful to get the first person's some other people's just experience reading it to make sure like that your genre's right. And I will say I've had the same thing happen. People will be like, wow, why is this relationship so crappy? Like, why are these people so crappy? That I'm like, oh no.
Whoopsie.
Oh no. That's something I gotta go talk about. But yeah, doing that initial pass and just making sure that the genre is coming off the page, that if it's supposed to be funny, that it's funny, that if it's supposed to be scary, it's scary, is such an important step. And it doesn't involve necessarily like needing to get tons of notes on your script, just a vibe check, right? Which
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I was thinking, when I'm checking my script, in addition to doing the kinds of things that you're doing, some stuff I do for self-editing is I just super mechanically go into my screenwriting software and try to I'm checking for consistency. So there's some really simple things that you can do, like have it export a character list. A lot of screenwriting softwares can do that. And make sure that you don't have like Theo misspelled in a couple places, and now it thinks that like THOE toe is a character. Like sometimes just when you're typing fast, I have done things like mix up a letter and then now it thinks that that's another character, and it's just a quick way to be like, I didn't change someone's name, misspell someone's name somewhere, did I? And then similarly, you can do the same things with scene headings, just making sure that if every single time you refer to the kitchen in this house, it's kitchen, comma, Theo's house, that you don't flip the order sometimes, that you can look at all of your different scene headings in a list, an exported list, and just real quick, make sure, am I consistent? Just to make it feel like a more organized and neat reading experience. That's something that is always really helpful to me as kind of a last pass. Just like, let's make sure this whole thing is clean. And I think in terms of just cleaning up for readability, the reading it out loud is such an important thing. It's because that's kind of how a lot of people read to themselves anyway, is kind of like narrating it in their head when they're trying to read it. So it'll kind of mirror the way that you'd say it out loud. And it's good to just make sure that there's no stumbling blocks for the reader.
Yeah, because your mouth will find them. Like your brain will fix them, but your mouth will not be able to fix them.
Yeah, exactly. So another question that I have for you is, we've talked about what are the good things that we can do when we're getting ready. What are some kind of like pitfalls to watch out for? Like, what are some mistakes that people might make when they're editing, like over editing, anything like that?
I think one of the first things is not giving yourself enough space from the project. And I've seen this so many times where people just stay in it for so long and they don't give themselves enough time to really see any opportunities, right? Where you need that space and you need to work on something else. So when you come back, I'm talking 6 weeks, right? You can say, oh, yeah, I'm noticing this now. I can see that the flow is maybe not as good. But when you're in it, or you're kind of repeating over and over again, your brain knows it by heart, so it can't find things, right? Like, it's like you look at your wall every day, you're not going to notice that, there's a big scratch in it or whatever. And then, like, with space, and like over editing, I think it's about, don't do a pass where you're looking for mistakes. Like, don't do too many passes looking for mistakes. I think that's a weird place for the brain to get into. And I noticed this when I was editing more often professionally, when I was like doing multiple manuscripts a week kind of thing for publishers. I was always looking for mistakes as I was doing a lot of copy editing. And it actually made me like mentally ill. Like, I think that it made me such a miserable person. And I noticed that whenever I do a copy edit for a friend as a favor, I have a bad week. Always, I have a bad week. So I think it's really important to like flip around the psychology of that and look for opportunities. If you're constantly looking for mistakes, you're going to find mistakes, but you're not going to find like, oh, hey, like, what if I did this? And that's where the space is going to come in handy too, right? Like, I just did this. I have a project, a novel on submission right now, and I haven't touched it months maybe. And, I had kind of a moment of thought, which this is a totally tangential thought, but I think it's really important that you don't send anything out for submission that you are not confident that if your idol read it, that draft, that you would feel good about it, right? Like, think about your favorite writer.
That's an interesting benchmark. Yeah.
Your favorite director in the world, right? Sofia Coppola, Greta Gerwig. If Greta Gerwig read this draft, would you feel the need to preface it by saying, oh, this is still in a work in progress? Because if you do feel like that, then it is not ready to go out. So take the time. I feel like you're never going to regret taking a little bit of extra time. But when you get to that part, there's always going to be a period of space, and you're always going to notice things that happens forever. So you do eventually have to reach a point of no return where you're like, okay, this has got to go out. But what happened with me is I had this realization that, okay, yeah, like if this book had, like if I was doing this book myself right now, I actually don't think I like this structure. And it's not that the structure that exists is bad. I just think that my opinions on the story have changed in this, probably like many months since I've looked at it. So I decided, okay, I'm going to do another pass at it, just for, it's for myself, it's for its future, just to see what happens. But I've really been noticing opportunities, and they're small, but they're like, oh, okay, this is just the tiniest little shift, but it's really elevating what I need here. So time is everything.
Yeah. So give yourself enough time and be really intentional about thinking of it as looking for opportunities, not looking for mistakes. I think that's great advice, because it can be easy to get down on yourself, especially if if you get stuck in that editing cycle where there's no space in between when you finish writing, and then you're immediately reading it again and again and again and again, and just doing drafts back to back and trying to just fix everything. It can be frustrating sometimes to be like, how come I keep missing these things? Like, how come it's not perfect yet? It's really easy to get in your own head, and I'm definitely guilty of that.
And every pass,
Yeah, I'm the worst. Like, I'll send my manager a draft. It'll be like labeled like script, whatever name, version 2.4, and then a few hours later I'll send version 2.5, and I'll say, don't read the last one. I noticed a typo. Don't read it. Noticed a typo. And then a little bit later, version 2.6, found a typo, fixed it. I should not be doing that.
Do not do that.
Don't make that face at me. I know it's bad. I know it's bad.
That's the time though. You know what? I do notice this because I do not do many drafts of my works. I have had works that have gone to people that have been on draft 3, which is something I should not say out loud. But it's because I put so much time in between my drafts, and I do so much like work on, like under it, that it's like, okay, every draft is like, okay, I'm doing multiple passes in a draft, right? It's not just like one pass. But when I consider something a draft, I would not do 14, 15 drafts of
Right.
something. I would do 4 to 5, and those would have a few different passes within them.
Yeah.
I think when you get into 14, 15 drafts and you're the cycle, that's really
Yeah.
dangerous.
Full drafts, absolutely not. My whole thing is like, I'll fix a typo, call it the next version, just so I know that it's more updated, like version 2. If it's a version 2 that's a second draft, 0.8 means I've fixed something eight times or
But, I think this is a really important thing about writers that I've been thinking about a lot lately, is that there is this like double-edged sword of the psychology of a writer. And one side of that sword is that we need to have an ego, right? Like we need to have an ego that says, I'm great at this and people want to read what I have to say,
yeah,
right?
you have
That
to.
needs to exist. And the other side of the sword, which is very, very important, is being critical enough to be able to see the opportunities in your own work. Like I think a lot of
Mhm.
writers miss this, where they get just down on themselves and critical, but it's not actually pushing them forward. So you need to be able to edit. And the only way that I can compare this to is I've been watching a lot of Top Chef lately. And you know how they say in Top Chef, where they're like, you need to learn how to edit your recipes, right? Because they have too many things on the plate or the flavors aren't right or whatever. It's like you need to know on the spot how to make it better, right? So that's a
Yeah.
skill. And if you fall to either side of that sword, the high ego side, which I am very, very, very familiar with clients, right? Or the high self criticism side, which is where a lot of us get lost and maybe give up. Either of those sides is dangerous, and we need to somehow balance the sword. And that's hard. And this is part of like competitions and part of finessing your work is, when do you hit that point where you think this is good enough?
Yeah, good enough is a really difficult space to find, and it's easy to fall victim to over editing, but you know finessing. And my favorite thing is I send my script to someone, like my manager or a client or something, and then I immediately go into my sent emails and read what I just sent. It's such a bad habit, because like, what am I going to do, send them version 2.8? The answer is yes, I will. But should I? No. It's such a bad habit. I should not be going into my sent emails and reading it. But at some point you have to, especially for more formal things where it's like, okay, I'm going to actually submit this to Kina Lime. I'm going to actually submit this to Austin, or I'm going to actually submit this to a producer who is asked to read the script, not just my poor manager who I shouldn't do it. I shouldn't do that. I'm not going to make excuses. I probably will keep making excuses. But, if it has to be submitted to something more formal and locked in, what is good enough? And like, when is your script ready to leave the nest? And, how do you know that it's like it's close enough to your vision for it that you would be okay if Greta Gerwig read it or something like that? Because it's also really easy to get stuck in the, like you were just talking about, on like the negative self-talk side of the sword, like where you're like, Greta Gerwig should never read my script. Like, this is terrible. I just can't get it right. But
You have to like the work.
you have to.
Here's
Yeah.
where I found for me is that I have periods where I love my work. I have periods where I hate my work. I'm fall very prey to this like self-hatred cycle that's terrible. It's really, really not good. And then somewhere in the middle, I like my work. And when it's there, that's when I feel like, okay, I can share this with people because I am not stuck in this weird ego space where I have no clarity because I'm in it, right? These are my
Yeah.
emotions or whatever. And I put a lot of myself into my stories. So it's hard sometimes where it's like, hey, like these things aren't just stories. These are like facets of my life and my psyche that I have put into this. And when you love something or when you're in that ego space, I don't think you're ready to hear objective feedback or criticism or even just a pass.
And maybe you shouldn't be, honestly. Like
You should not.
maybe you should just kind of ride that high and finish your freaking script, you know?
You do.
Like,
You've got to ride the high and you've got to get back to this middle ground of like, I like this. This is tight. The story is solid. There are setups and payoffs. The characters have arcs. You can sit there and objectively say, I have done everything that I can do right now to make this story the best it can be, right? And there will always be periods of time where you will have realizations. But when you come to that middle ground, I like it. I feel like that's the place. If you love it, you're probably a little too far in. If you hate it, you're probably not in enough.
yeah.
Take some space, you know? So one of them, they're both, take a little space, get away from it, go work on something else, do something that somebody compliments you on. Like I just did a TikTok the other day and like a couple people replied, they were like, oh, wow, you're so cool. And I was like, oh my God, I really needed that. Like I really needed some random internet stranger to tell me I was cool. And I was like, wow, that just brightened up my whole day.
Sometimes you need a little Gen Z boost, you know?
You do. You
Like,
need it.
yeah, it's absolutely. I was just looking at some questions from the Discord and I wanted to kind of take a look at those. I guess let me see. If you're ever, so we've talked about kind of making sure that you're not over editing and things like that, like that you're not kind of getting too lost in the weeds. One question that I have is about the different places that you can, this is kind of a more technical question about the different places that you can submit to. In your opinion, this is actually not something I'd really considered before having this conversation, but in your opinion, is there a difference in preparing your script for a contest versus preparing your script for a producer versus preparing your script for a manager? Is there something different that you should be editing for?
I think
What do you think that is?
I think that contests are all about the wildly coolest version of that story, right? We don't care about budget, right? We don't care about all of these like details. Make it the coolest story that ever existed. Whereas if you're sending it to a manager or producer, that's going to matter, right? In a contest, it's like, oh, this is bombastic. We love it. To a manager or producer, they're going to say, wow, this is $50 million and we can't make this. So I think that there is like, and Nathan Graham Davis, when we had him on, like he had a really great point that he brought up where writing to spec and writing to production are very different processes. And I thought that was really brilliant because it's true. When you're writing to spec, it's your pure imagination. It's let's make this cool. But when you are writing to production, to an actual development slate, you have to start thinking about things like setups and characters and how many pages a character might have and how their lines are. And all of these very strange logistical details that don't really have a lot to do with writing, but have more to do with filmmaking. So I do think that there is a critical difference there.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that it's just different scripts, or do you think it's actually like different passes? Like, do you think that there's a version of doing a different pass for your script to make it more contest ready versus like, oh, I actually have an opportunity to send this to a producer, I should do a pass to make it more production ready? Like, do you think there's merit to doing that, or do you think it's something that happens in the idea phase?
I think that there's merit to both of those thoughts, because I know that myself, when I write a screenplay, I don't do the bombastic spec version. Though maybe I should give that a try, but I do have a mind, and I think it's because I'm certified script supervision, and I've been on set and I've done this process of like, breaking down a screenplay. So that really instilled something in my mind when I write, where I'm already thinking about setups and I'm already thinking about how to keep it from being like over budget, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's really all up in your instincts and how you want to write. I don't think there's anything wrong with writing the wild spec screenplay. I think we need that. I think that's pure creation, and maybe the best version of screenwriting. But I do think that there comes a time, especially if somebody's interested, where it's a good idea. Like if you have a producer who wants to look at your work, I would say, look at what that producer has done. Look at
Yeah.
what they've worked on and say, okay, like what are their sensibilities? Is this, or what is the budget they're working with? If they tell you, hey, this is a $5 million budget and you've got a $15 to $20 million movie, it might not be a bad idea to take a look to see if there are easy wins, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not changing the whole story, but like, oh, like could I, you know, could this not be in space and still be the same story?
Yeah, like, do I really need all these shots of them, like, on the outside of the spaceship? Could it just be a set inside? Like,
Yeah,
little things like
simple.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's something I definitely veer hard to the bombastic side. Like, I mentioned this before, but I was helping somebody do a rewrite for their horror script, and I was feeling myself at the ending. I was like, and then the car crashes into the building and it blows up. And he had to be like, look, we're doing this for under $1 million. Maybe just the car's on fire. Like, let's, I was like, oh crap, of course. I was just really feeling it in the moment and chasing the story. And it's one of those adjustments that you make when like you're writing for something that is going to be produced versus writing for something on spec. And just little things like that, like where it's like it's going to be cheaper to light a car on fire than a building. So can you make it feel dramatic with this slightly cheaper choice? It's
a skill.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's a knack for it too, and just kind of making sure that you're looking for those opportunities. Like, there's a few things that really crank up the budget on a script, where if you're submitting to somebody who could make it, or if you're submitting to a contest that's budget conscious, like Kino Lime, where they want it to be 15 million or under, there's a few things that can knock up the budget that you can keep in mind for pulling it down. Like, for example, shooting at night costs more than shooting in the day, because even at night you have to light the whole set, right? Like you have to light everything. There's
and the chance you could go overtime, like night shoots, when you get into overtime where you like go, like there are so many penalties and there's so much extra money. I know a lot of the productions here, I'm not under any NDAs for these productions, so it's just gossip, so I can say it. But a lot of productions here sometimes go into like triple overtime. And it's like, wow, so much of that budget went to like a night shoot going over like too long,
Yeah. There's, so like in terms of things that can pull up the budget, there's night shoots. So if things don't have to be at night and you're really trying to look and see like, can I pull this budget down? That's something to keep in mind. Any kind of like weapons, prop weapons, things like that, that's going to raise your budget. Any kind of like animals that need to be acting, any children. It's not necessarily like pull out the children of your script, but it's just something to keep in mind that you're going to have more limitations on that shoot that might make it more expensive, because kids because necessarily there's some rules about not making kids work these insane shoots.
I dealt with that with my Zelda Fitzgerald feature, because there's kind of this important thing where she's got this 4-year-old kid, and I'm like, I don't want a 4-year-old to be anywhere near the set of this movie. So there was a version where like the kid is just not there. They talk about the kid, but she's not present. And I think I ended up like evening it out where like you kind of see her in the background and she has like one moment where she's on. Because I'm like, like a child shouldn't be near this set. It's wild. And two, like it drives up the budget, and it's hard on kids. Like it's really difficult on child actors. I think Sarah Polley talks a lot about that. And I found that really interesting and important to hear that from her perspective. Like there's a lot of things that can go wrong and that can screw up a child's development.
There's the ethics side of it too, like where it's like, is
Yeah,
this what I want to put a kid in? Is this the situation? But I mean, I say that as someone who really likes to write things starring
right.
younger people and like for younger audiences. That's kind of been my genre, like my space. So I
Your
say that
niche.
as someone who is fully like loves writing stuff for younger audiences. It's just something to keep in mind. The fact that it can raise the budget, and you want to be realistically conscious of what situation you're putting different actors in.
Period pieces.
Yeah,
Period pieces way up the budget, especially if you need picture cars. Like even if you're writing something that's the 90s and you have a scene
yeah.
that's on the street and there have to be cars, they have to source every single one of those cars. They need to be authentic 90s cars. It's like it's a whole thing. It's a lot of work to do it.
In
Um,
2020, when I wrote a script that took place in 2011, it was
mm,
told, can you take out that detail and can it just be modern? Because anything, any like setting it any time that's specific, honestly,
yeah.
just is going to increase the price just because you're going to have to do a little bit more work. If it's not, that's not to say don't write a script that takes place in the 90s. You 100% can. But if you are, it should be essential. Like there should be a reason that it's set in the 90s and that it's not set in 2024. It should be something that's baked into the story. So if you're kind of arbitrarily saying, no, just for vibe, I want it to be set here, maybe not. Maybe consider, could you make it contemporary? Could you make it modern? But yeah, just a little thing to keep in mind. Period pieces, like you said, cars can increase prices. Fight scenes, intimacy scenes can also
Intimacy.
increase the prices, and just kind of do these things. Again, none of this stuff means don't do it. It just means if you are submitting to a budget conscious situation for whatever reason, these are things that you can do a quick check for and be like, okay, does this guy need to like pull a gun in this scene? Could he just kind of reach for his pocket? Like, are there things that I can do to make it not quite so expensive as you're checking the budget?
And you usually can, right? Like I wrote a lot of screenplays that were just very simple things. Like I remember reading a screenplay and I counted something like 25 different setups in like a very short span of time. And I was like, listen, like you you don't need this many setups. Like nothing has changed so significantly about the
You mean like
story that
scenes, right? Like
like different places. So like
yeah.
one setup was like we're in the kitchen, one setups were in the front yard, one setups were in the living room. Like they were all, I think it was military, so there was like all of these different like places that like do exist. Like all of these places exist, and like in real life, like maybe the story would exist in that many locations. But just the simple act of like pick two, pick two
Yeah.
or three places where like stuff can happen, because if it's not critical to the story, you just saved yourself a ton of money.
Yeah. And the other thing that, again, I'm just kind of thinking through another one of the scripts that I was helping to rewrite. One consideration too is just, are you calling for a ton of background actors? Like,
Mhm.
like are you deciding that there should be a crowd of people here when there doesn't necessarily need to be a huge crowd of people here? It's not that it's impossible to get a bunch of background actors, but again, it's just like, especially if they have to be in costume, if they have to be kind of aware of what's going on, if it's not just, oh, everyone show up here and pretend to be excited by Spider-Man swinging overhead. If it's a little bit more complicated than that, then suddenly that can increase the complexity of your project. So just something to kind of keep in mind.
I think they're good things to think about. And there's also the element, I think, in contests that the people that are reading your script for contests, or the first rounds, they are regular script readers. They are not necessarily producers. They're not necessarily people who are decision makers in the industry. They are people who read a lot of scripts, and they are people who have opinions about screenwriting, right? I've seen, I don't know how many posts from people who read for Austin or read for Blacklist or read for whoever, and they will list down like 10, 15 things. Here are the things that I see all the time. that you can fix in your screenplay before you submit to a contest. And I think it's a really good idea. And I will try to find something like that for the Discord,
Yeah.
so that everyone can look at it. But I think it's a good idea to look through them, to say, okay, am I doing this? There are some script readers who are very feel very powerful about the use of something like we see.
And you just kind of can't anticipate that, right? Because sometimes sometimes people are real freaking sticklers for things. And like my stance on that is kind of when it works, it works. That's my personal stance. It's like when it flows on the page and it helps to capture the vibe. And when you read it out loud, it's smooth and it makes sense. When the way that you want to articulate something is technically breaking a rule, I tend to lean on the side of go for it. But you have to kind of accept that there are going to be people who are saying, how dare you say she is sitting? How dare you, how dare you do this? And like, even if it flows better, even if you've considered it the other way and you've played with it and you're like, you know what, I'm making this as a conscious choice. There's some people who just care about arbitrary things, and you can't necessarily be prepared for every single one of those complaints in the same way that
constantly.
Yeah, in the same way that you can't be prepared for just preference and taste, in terms of like, maybe you have a reader who is really, really, really sick of reading about these, like, has just read like 17 female protagonists that are sardonic and like sarcastic in the voiceover, and then your script is the 15th one that has a sassy female narrator with a really dry sense of humor, and they're just over it by that point. There's some things you just can't really account for, and it's just about doing your best version.
That speaks to you. Like, I have an opinion on we see, in that I'm not a stickler for it, but I feel like if you're using we see and it's very clear that like the thing that we are looking at is with our eyeballs, then like it's probably not necessary. However, there are times when we see the audience something that the characters don't see. Right? So we see
exactly
happening in the background. No one, the characters don't see that. And I think that's really important and really powerful. But if you have like, we see the lightning crash from the sky. The lightning
just crashes, man. Yeah, like just make it happen. Yeah. There was one time that I really use we see a lot in a horror script that I was writing, when it really matters the difference between, like, in order to create suspense and anticipation and just tension, the difference between what the character knows and what the audience knows is sometimes really important. And we see is it's a shorthand, very fast, save space on the page to just communicate what's happening. Sometimes it's your best option. I've also done things before, like my internet script, I think, opened with a we see, which was like one of the scripts that helped me get traction. And it was because I wanted to start with the old Windows desktop computer with the hills and the blue sky, and it just like looks like that field. That was
because you're looking at it, the whole vibe is like you're looking at a computer screen versus you're physically in something, right?
Exactly. So it was like we see these beautiful clouds, and then we like push through, and then we go in to see the world of internet. And so
being
that
intentional.
It's about thinking, like, because in that case it doesn't really make sense to say just straight up, there's this wide shot, and then now we're slow. If I really want to talk about, like, we're kind of zooming in and I want to get that feeling without saying literal, we're zooming. If you still want to kind of keep a little bit of like not call for specific shots, it can be helpful to say, like, we see this happening. And then I saw a question come in about, can you elaborate what is unfavorable about she is sitting?
It's passive.
Passive. So in general, in your scripts are written in present tense. So she sits would be preferable. And some people are real sticklers about this, or really, really think that you should never ever say she is sitting, she is talking, she is doing this, whatever. They would say she sits here, like, so they'd rather you not use gerunds. I think that's what that is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But sometimes I think, sometimes in my professional opinion, it simply makes more sense to say she is sitting if it's
Yeah, depending on the
important.
flow. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it's important to have that you're interrupting an action. And if you say you walk in, she sits at the table, but it was really important that when the character walks in, this person was already sitting at the table, then it doesn't really make sense to keep it in present tense just for the sake of some arbitrary rule. It makes more sense in that context for clarity and story purposes to say she is sitting at the table. And some people will still get mad about that. Personally,
They
I
might,
think
but I feel like they should get that one because I feel like it's clear, like, if the
they
action is
should get over
happening,
it.
she sits, right? If we
Yeah.
walk in on somebody and they are already sitting, then she is sitting would be the way to format that. And I feel like a good reader would understand that. And that being said, not every reader is going to get your script. Like, when
Yeah.
I was writing a lot of horror, I wrote very feminist horror, right? And I knew if I'm putting this into a contest and I get somebody who is not into this and they don't get it, which
Yeah.
happened, and it happened to me. I remember getting feedback that I was absolutely bewildered by. And they were like, oh, I think you should do this with the ending. And I was like, that's just not what this is about at all. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
like, you're taking that risk sometimes that, like, it's not always going to be perfect. So all you can do is make it the best story. Make sure that you are confident that if your idol or if somebody you really respect read that script, you would feel
Mhm.
confident to say, this represents my ability as a writer. If you
Yeah.
don't believe that,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think, something that is important to keep in mind too is that we can obsess about all the bad readers that there are, because there are bad readers, but at the end of the day, you can't account for everybody's weird little quirks and ticks
no.
and the things that they're going to look for in the scripts. You can't account for what one producer might super care about. They might hate bold headlines, they might hate these things. You can't account
Rude.
for that. Rude, exactly. It's obviously superior. But the only thing that you can really worry about is, I think, writing it for your ideal audience, writing the story that would super, super appeal to your audience, and then making it an enjoyable reading experience. I think that those are really the two things that you can bring to the forefront, rather than getting lost in the weeds of is somebody going to hate that I did this, that I broke this rule? Maybe, but if it makes it clearer, if it makes it more readable, and it makes the story stronger for your intended audience, then some people might not get it, and that's okay. But you just have to kind of make the decision that that's who you're writing for, is readability and your audience.
And I think that the majority of readers, like, if the script is 95% excellent and 5% weird taste stuff, like, they're gonna realize that. Like, I have a hard time believing, and maybe I'm being naive or too optimistic about this. I think that if you have done your very, very best and you've written an incredibly strong script, that the majority of readers are going to recognize, this person knows their craft, this person has character arcs, this person
Yeah.
has this. Those are more important than kind of these little, like, things in there. And I think if 5% of your script is weird little subjective, 5% of your script is subjectivity, but 95% of your script is objectively, great,
Yeah, clean, good. Yeah, it's
clean,
good writing.
good, you're gonna do well. Like, that's more than half the battle.
Mhm. I will say one thing is that I think that when you're submitting to agents, producers, situations like that, I completely agree with you that you want to make sure that your script is ready for if Greta Gerwig picked it up and ran with it. If you're submitting to a contest, I think that sometimes there's merit to saying, this is where I'm at now.
Yeah.
The submission's closed for this year. Let's just throw it out into the universe and see what happens. I think that when you're submitting to producers and agents and more like actually getting this made prospects, there's merit to making sure that it is ready. It's your best foot forward because this is kind of you introducing yourself into the world. I'd say the stakes are significantly lower for contests and things like that, because the worst,
If you can afford it.
If you can afford it, yes, do not just, I would highly recommend picking out a couple that you can afford that are good fits for what you do. But there's very low stakes for competitions and contests in terms of like, you're not going to sour a potential connection to you because you submitted to a contest. That's just not going to happen. It's not a problem. You know, I've submitted so many scripts to so many contests over the years, and it's kind of just like, this is pretty freaking internal. It's pretty limited. Sometimes you just want to throw something and see if it sticks, and you're going to fix it up later, and that's okay. But I totally agree that for anything more personal, more individual, more like one-on-one, you want to make sure that that you feel good about it, that you feel ready. But if you've never entered a contest before, if you're just kind of breaking in, if this is kind of your first try at anything and you have the funds to do so, I think do your best pass, do what we were talking about, read it out loud, do a vibe check, check for subtext, do like quick consistency checks, like are your character names always spelled the same, check for little grammar things, and then just freaking send it off, send it to a contest and see how it goes for you.
And get some feedback. You know, I think this one's really important. In the world of novels, I think that getting feedback is more common. Like having beta readers is a really common thing. Like you have like alpha readers, beta readers, and paying for editorial services is more common. And I think that in the screenwriting world, for whatever reason, paying for development services is not as common. But I think it's really useful because, you know, you can throw your script at 10 people and get a bunch of wildly different feedback. Or you can find a consultant, or you can find like a development person who is really passionate and has the same vibe as you do and that you really connect with. And they could be the ones to be like, hey, okay, here are the things in this script that are opportunities to do something different. Here's something. Here's an idea that could elevate the conflict, right? Like you can get that really great feedback that not everybody can do. And I think that sometimes when you're new and you're learning, like it's a really great idea to just give that a try, right? Don't spend all your money on it. You know, find like, you know, young screenwriters, like we have, I would say, like a very affordable consultation service as compared to what everyone else does. Or in our Discord, you know, we have free feedback opportunities where you can post a page, or you can go to a workshop and get some pages read, or our spring lab, or, you know,
Absolutely.
which is on Tuesday, we go through everybody's materials from the start of the idea through to writing your pages, and you're going to get guided, customized feedback through it all. And it might not always be the answer, but if you can get a couple of opportunities out of it, I feel like it feels nice to grow with other writers.
Absolutely. And that spring writing lab is actually open for about another, like accepting submissions, applicant, like people you can join for about another week or so. It's going to be a small group that we're running. Theo and I are running it. We want to have a max of 15 writers. So we want to keep it pretty intimate and small. And it's going to be meeting on Tuesdays at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. So if that works for your schedule, it's 10 weeks. It's only $100 total, so $10 a week, which is much lower than anything that we were able to find online in terms of like writers groups and things like that. But I just dropped that link. It'll be in the description. So if you're interested, I highly recommend checking that out. We have an amazing group that's a complete mix of like professional screenwriters, aspiring screenwriters, just interest in different genres and things like that. It's a really good group, and I'm excited about it. And we have a little bit of room left. So I would recommend checking that out. And I will also say that this month in March, we're really looking at helping you get ready for contests and things like that, because this is kind of the time. This is the ramp up. A lot of these contests are opening in March.
And Nickel has a cap this year.
Yeah, Nickel has a cap this year. They're only accepting so many scripts, so you got to get in fast if you want to do it. So this month for us is really about helping you get ready to put your best foot forward in a contest. So next week, we are actually talking to one of the producers at Keen Lime, which is an amazing free screenwriting competition. But we're also co-hosting a little free workshop with them where we're going to be talking about polishing your script. And we're still working out the exact details of that, but we will announce it. So if you are in the Discord, you'll hear about it. So I'd recommend you join our Discord. But we're going to be looking at basically like producibility. So we'll do a workshop on making sure your script can come in at the budget that they're looking for. We're going to do a workshop on readability. So really like making sure that your script is fun to read, that the narration, that the actions, that all of that part is just an enjoyable reading experience, to kind of elevate your work within the contest setting in particular. So producibility, readability, and I think we were also thinking about just kind of like, marketability. So
Yeah,
in a different space than producibility, marketability, like what's the log line that you're using to try to hook people? Who's your target audience? Is there a way that we can make this appeal to them more? If you're writing in a specific genre, are you giving people what they've come to expect out of that genre, or at least intentionally subverting their expectations? So just all those things. We're expecting to do 3 little workshops here in the next couple weeks, and those will be free, probably on our Discord or on the YouTube. Still figuring that out. So we hope that you will join us. But thank you so much for joining us today, everybody. And we hope that you will join us next time on the Young Screenwriters podcast. Thank you.
Have a great weekend, everyone.
Hey, everybody in our live audience. Thank you so much for joining us for the live recording of the podcast. Now we can kind of get to the questions that we want to still address, but maybe we couldn't quite work in the moment. Let's start here. Tommy, how do you take a script and present it to a producer with the intention of being the director as well? That's a tough one, Tommy. It's very tough. I'll be honest with you. If you are going to a producer and saying, I want to direct it as well, realistically, you need to have substantial directing experience to back that up. Now, could be shorts. You can come in with a low budget script and have a history of doing short films that you directed, that are out in the world and did well at festivals and contests and stuff like that. But if you want to be the director, you absolutely need that track record. I'll say that probably there's a little bit more wiggle room in terms of like, say you directed a bunch of shorts that are on YouTube and they've gotten traction on YouTube. It doesn't necessarily have to be through the traditional film festival circuit, although that is still something people look for. In order to do this, you need to have traction.
You have to be a director first, right?
Yeah.
You're not a screenwriter that's hoping to direct. You are a director who is ready to make your own films. And if you look at the people who are doing this, the professionals doing this, look at what they've done. If you look at somebody like Ari Aster, for example, he went to AFI, I think, and he wrote and directed a number of shorts before working on his own stuff. So I think it's really important that this is a kind of a different pathway. Like there's a screenwriter pathway, there's a director pathway, and there is a writer-director pathway.
Yep. And
if you go in and say, I want to direct this, and you don't have a sizzle reel and you don't have anything to back yourself up, they're not going to take you seriously, right?
Yep. And Jim says Whiplash was sold on a short film. That's exactly right. A lot of my favorite, particularly in the lower budget space, like Short Term 12,
Right.
Whiplash.
Whiplash.
There's a ton of them. I'm trying.
Horror.
What is it?
There's some horror. So
Yeah.
Lights Out so on YouTube he's Pony Smasher, and I can never remember his full name, but he's wonderful, and his YouTube channel is excellent. And he did, I think that his short was a minute long. It was called Lights Out. I remember we showed this to you because you were really scared of it. And he used that, and he used his YouTube channel, and he used that to get to get a feature film. And now he did one of the Annabelle movies and all of that. But you've got to be serious about directing.
Yeah. I will say, though, that it is something that you can do. Like, this is not to discourage you. This is something that you can absolutely do. And like I was saying, it doesn't necessarily have to be through the traditional film festival circuit. It's just that you do need to have done it. So if it's something that you want to do a feature, you want to get it made, I would highly, highly recommend writing a short script and directing a short script that is a similar genre vibe, maybe even like playing with your protagonist in a different situation, smaller version of your feature. It doesn't have to be one-to-one. I think Whiplash was pretty like, this is the short version of Whiplash. And I think and Short Term 12, I think, was the same way. Like, it was like a short of this. And there's a lot of times where it's literally like the short is the taste of the idea, and then that does well, and then they're able to go with the producer and say, hey, here's a script for under 5 million, under 3 million, and the short did well. I directed it. I do this. It's my voice. It's my story. You can see that it did well, and you can get traction that way. And Tommy, I think you're in our Discord with us already, so I'd be happy to chat about that more.
Do you know what I think it's like? Oh, sorry, before we go to this, just to talk about Top Chef a little more. It would be like if you wrote recipes, and you went to a restaurant and was like, hey, I've got all these recipes and I want to be the head chef. And you had never made those recipes, or like you didn't have like chef skills. I feel like this is the same thing, right? Like you just need to have both skills, and you've got to, and just be a good director, and like make micro shorts, make 1 minute shorts, make TikToks, like make as many things as you can so people can see your sensibilities and see your shot styles and, what your vibe is as a director.
Yeah, it's having a short film that is completed and something that you can show someone alongside that script is going to increase your chances exponentially. People say that like having a completed screenplay, a completed feature screenplay already puts you in the top like 1% of aspiring screenwriters. Having a completed feature screenplay and a short that is produced and available for people to watch puts you again in the top 0.5% of aspiring writer directors. Doing the thing will get you a very long way. And I mean, I'm working the rewrite that I keep talking about. He did the same thing. He did a short film that did extremely well in the Atlanta Film Festival a while ago.
That's a good one.
And yeah, it's great. And he did a short film that did well there. I think that had to have been done on a pretty much like a very low budget, extremely low budget. But it was just a really compelling, scary idea. It was in horror, so that helps too. Horror is kind of has a really vibrant community. And then now he's working on the feature version and is writing it for a low budget, about $1 million. And it is getting a lot of traction, really riding on that short that he did that showed people that he could do it. And he has a script to back it up. So it's, yeah, if you haven't, I'd love to, we could talk about it more in the Discord again, but yeah, if you haven't made a short yet, that's where I'd start. And then this question, what do you do if a script you wrote comes in short, like 75 pages and not 80 or 90? What is funny is that we, even though we haven't announced the lineup for this month all the way, what we're doing the last Friday of March in our live stream, what day, I don't know what day that is, the 20 something, 29, I don't know, is our podcast is going to be about overwriting, underwriting. Theo and I are both chronic underwriters.
I've written 45 page features. Like,
look, man, look. And then I had something happen to me that I complain about all the time and I'll never stop, is that for the first time in my life, I wrote a script on a Windows computer and I was using the Courier Prime, which is John August's revision of Courier, because it like looks nicer, it's prettier, it's pretty much the same, sleek. But it's sleek, it's nice. And I was using that because I was like, that's what I use on my Mac. Turns out Final Draft for Windows can't handle it. So I wrote this script that I'd meticulously planned out, and my pilot episode came in at like 90 something pages. And I was like, oh my God, I'm an overwriter. I never knew that about myself. And I was like showing my manager and he was like, what is this? Like, is it like, this is a feature length thing. It's a pilot. And I'm like, I don't know what happened. I don't know. This has never happened to me before. And then lo and behold, I imported it into Arc Studio Pro and it fixed the formatting. It was freaking like 65 pages. It was a pilot. I was so so lesson
that was serendipitous though.
Yeah, I'm glad I freaking checked. I was like, you know what, this looks a little funny. It messed with the margins. It added some like extra, just like a little bit of extra spacing between lines and stuff. Yeah, a little bit extra kerning. And it made my script 90 something pages instead of 65. I thought I was an overwriter, but I have kept my title.
My only screenplay that has come in, and I don't want to call it over because I ended at 120 pages, which is where I wanted it to be, is my adaptation for Queen of Indie Sleaze. And it was because I knew, like, going into it, I was like, oh my God, taking this and putting it into a feature is going to be so difficult. But I got it to 120 tight pages. And that is the only thing that I have written that is not wildly under. So you are not alone writing under. It happens. It's normal. Like, I feel like the majority of writers are overwriters. So that's what most people talk about. But I think when you're an underwriter, you're just being super efficient. Like, I find when I look at my zero drafts, I'm like, oh, like, I'm being so efficient to the point that, like, I'm not,
you lose the characters.
I'm not giving enough. Yeah. Like,
yeah.
I need, there needs to be more scene description, more dialogue, more everything. And part of that's because I write by hand for the most part.
Yeah.
Because when I came over from writing novels to writing screenplays, I really wanted to teach myself to write short, and I did that.
You took it to heart. You took it to heart.
I'm an overachiever. Let's,
and sometimes that means underwriting. Yeah, it's so long. We will get more into it on the last Friday of the month, but long story short, my advice would be try to really honestly evaluate why you think that happened. Sometimes what happens is there's not enough obstacles in the second act. Like maybe your protagonist is just accomplishing it a little bit too easily, and adding in a really, really strong midpoint reversal would help bump you those extra 15 pages. That's sometimes a note that can get you there, is kind of like, if your act 2 kind of feels like obstacle without any sort of like dramatic ramp up in tension and stakes, sometimes you need a really strong midpoint reversal to kick on the engine and get us over the finish line. And that'll probably get you to those pages. But there's also a version where you're hitting all your beats. It's just that you're not spending any time getting to know the characters. And that's something where it can be really helpful to kind of map out, where are my characters' emotions ending in each scene, kind of like doing like the heartbeat thing that I think is talked about in John McKee's story, where it's like, are my characters leaving the scene on a high or on a low? And then am I kind of respecting that, or at least keeping that in mind when I come into the next scene? So like, if they just had like a big defeat, am I letting them sit in that defeat for a little bit? Like, am I letting them feel that emotion? Am I letting the audience feel that emotion before kind of moving them back out, and just being aware of the ups and downs of your story? That's something that's that's what my issue tends to be, is it tends to be like, am I actually letting my characters live in this moment and have responses and be fun? Because I get so like story driven that they're technically doing everything they need to do, but I don't give them enough breathing room.
You got to give your actors something to chew on too, right? Like, and I think that as like screenwriters, we sometimes don't fall into this too much, where it's like, oh yeah, like actors really need something to play with.
Yeah.
And that's like, okay, how can I make this way more fun? And that's, I think part of that is just like knowing actors, or just like watch YouTube videos for actors, right? Learn a little bit about the craft of acting. Like Uta Hagen is really great. Judith Weston is really great. And just see what actors are looking for and what monologues look like. And you can kind of get a sense for like, oh, okay, let's play. Like,
yeah, for sure. Let's see, one last question. How important is it that the narration / description of action be entertaining on its own, beside it being easily readable? I would say it's important. Just frankly, it's, if any words on your page should be a good reading experience, it is important. That does not mean that you have to be like super witty and hilarious the whole way through, and like that everything
unless it's like
needs,
a really good comedy.
Yeah, if it's comedy, then your scene descriptions should be funny. If it's a horror, then your scene descriptions should lean into the horror. I think it's more about matching tone in your scene descriptions and your narration than it is about focusing on just pure entertainment.
Paint a picture. Paint a picture, right? Like you want you want someone to be able to read your screenplay and actually see the movie in their head, beat by, moment by moment. Like and if you can't, if the reader cannot see it as the movie should be, which is, I mean, this is a tall order. We are talking about making a written document of words be a movie. That's a lot. It's hard work, but that's the expectation and that's the standard. And I don't know what the best way is to find it, except for just to play around and read screenplays and see who's good and see what other people are doing and find your voice.
Yeah, it's sort of like your scene description and your narration will carry the vibe that would be accomplished by everything else in the film. So like, the ambience, I don't know. Ambiance, the vibe, you need to accomplish the vibe in your scene descriptions and stuff like that. So I would just focus on finding like a genre, like making sure that it matches your genre, matches your tone, and is, besides it being just like readable, that your tone matching. So I think that's it for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We will be back next week interviewing Keena Lime, John Schramm from Keena Lime. He's a producer and screenwriter, and we're going to be talking about the kinds of scripts that that producers look for. And it's kind of fun. We're looking at Billy Elliot and kind of talking about like what lessons we can learn from that, like why that script is something that's appealing. And as a little bit more quick context, Keena Lime is a free screenwriting contest that anyone can enter, and the winner will be produced up to $15 million. So if your script is up to $15 million budget, they would produce it. So we're excited to chat with them. Thank you so much, everybody.
And don't forget, come and hang out with me on Sunday in the Discord, 10 a.m. Eastern, where we do our write-in. We chat. You get a chance to talk to other writers about what you're working on, and we do 2 writing sessions. I have gotten more done in these sessions than I do anywhere else. So come hang out with us in the Discord. It's a good time.
Yeah, please do. All right. Thank you, everyone.